Hi everyone, my name is Chantal. Welcome to my podcast. This is my first ever episode and I'm super excited. I want to talk a little bit about who I am, why I'm doing a podcast, and what you can see here if you follow and listen to it. Well, I'm an econ and policy major. I was born and raised in Germany, but my parents are from Angola and Mali. And right now I'm studying in the US. I've been here for 2 years. It's been really fun. And I really got into politics, I would say, when I was like 16. I went to international school. It's called United World College. It is a super fun place where you live with 80 plus nationalities, you vibe, you have a good time, it's really great. And I was in Armenia during that time, hence actually one of my tattoos that I just got. But basically speaking, I got to meet so many different people from so many really cool countries, and they had such amazing stories to tell, and many of them were from political nature. So based on that, I got really interested in politics. I like talking about it, I like reading about it, and I like sharing about it. And I think many people might be similar to me with the feeling of, what do I do? Like, maybe you care about an issue, maybe you care about Palestine, maybe you care about Ukraine, maybe you care about food insecurity, housing, whatever it is, and you're kind of like, I don't really know what to do as an individual, and I feel the exact same way. So I thought about what is the best way I feel most comfortable talking about these issues, and I think it's just chatting with people, sharing my thoughts and insights. Nothing I say is inherent fact, I'd say. Like, I'm going to share my opinion, I'm going to share my knowledge. If I say something that, people don't agree with, feel free, comment, tell me, because, I love changing my perspective if I agree. So, yeah, that's kind of me, a background of me. I'm hoping on this podcast, I'm just going to talk about whatever truly comes to my mind. I think it's going to be this really fun experience of just, hopefully learning from the people who watch this and who can give me really cool insights. But I hope maybe this is a casual way of just, listening to things you may want to learn more about, where you just feel like you can't share with anybody, don't really hear many opinions in it, and maybe I end up talking about it. So again, these are all just kind of random opinions. A lot of it is from classes I get to attend here at my school, because the school is so amazing. And I actually just started this class, the semester's basically over, but the class that I had this semester is Politics of Colonization. Such an interesting class, and literally the thing I got out of it is kind of like colonization is really laying in everything and so many fundamental issues we have. And I don't think we talk enough about it. So last class, we had this really cool class, which was called Environment and Colonialism and Environmental Racism. And I was kind of like, I don't really know what that was symbolizing. I think what I thought about was kind of like the general idea that many people have, like, natural catastrophes kind of disproportionately affect marginalized communities. We know that it is the big Western corporations who pollute the world, blah blah blah. So that is kind of what I imagine in it. But actually I got so much more out of it, which is really interesting, and I hope to share some of these things and some of the thoughts that were just kind of stuck in my head, and I really want to just bring them out to the world. So with just a little bit of background, the reason why this class specifically stuck with me, I wouldn't say that I am the best person when it comes to sustainability. I think there's so much more I can learn from people, so much more I could research about, which I'm also so excited for, that I hopefully will, particularly this summer. I feel like I have more time and can just really dig in there. But I thought about, when we talked about these issues, first what came onto me was kind of these movements, right? We had Fridays for Future, and kind of the entire idea of save the turtles, let me not buy plastic straws anymore, yappa. And inherently these were good movements, and inherently these were things that, they tried to address things that matter. And I think many of us jumped kind of on the bandwagon. I just remember so clearly when it was trendy at that point to care about sustainability and the environment and whatever. And my house didn't separate trash, because I tried to force my parents to separate the trash, and I was in this African house, and they were like, what the fuck are you talking about? So that was just really random. Or when I tried to really not buy plastic bags in any circumstances, which you should still, if you can't bring your tote bag, bring your freaking tote bag. But I think I never went deeper. I never went deeper than what was kind of right in front of me in the media, on my Instagram. And I don't know, I never thought about where is this all coming from? I understood the idea of companies are polluting, it's bad, we're all gonna die in 10 years. But where is this all coming from? What does this really mean? And I think the class that I took was so interesting, because it talked about the connections of environmentalism and the environment with a lot of colonial practices that we all perpetuate in our own way, right? So one thing we kind of talked about was indigenous knowledge as itself, right? Like, I think many indigenous communities are very connected to the land still, more than Western communities who kind of, particularly in the storm of capitalism, detach themselves from that reality, right? So, for instance, like slash and burn, I don't know if you guys know, it's like kind of this controlled way of setting specific areas on fire. And I always, by the way, I'm not going to go into all the definitions. I'm always going to recommend Googling some words you don't know, and I'm always going to like, maybe if I get the chance, write down what certain things mean. But it's an indigenous practice, and it was banned in many parts of the world. Why? Because people were like, oh, you're burning down the forest and you can't control the fire and it's dangerous. And I think, again, in itself, the idea of like, do not do dangerous acts, oh, burning forest doesn't sound good, makes sense. But I think there's so many layers to it, because practices like slash and burn actually have a really inherent agricultural purpose, particularly in indigenous communities, right? Like, it is about soil fertility, particularly in the long term. And a lot of these people, right, their entire livelihood, their livestock comes from actual farming, versus like the entire kind of processed idea of the West. And these communities, again, they're restricted in their knowledge of farming and how to treat land. And I think in that there's an inherent imposition, right? Like, as much as one might say like, oh, but like science here, science there, we figured this out. You cannot simply go into a community, then impose your idea of what's right and wrong, and completely dismiss their years-long traditions of farming that also work for them. And that's kind of me going off trail, what I want to say, but what is so important in that process is also understanding that we continue to perpetuate these communities with not. Okay, one thing that really upsets me is the idea of a lot of, I think, the Western countries now being like, save the planet, and we have caps on the pollution levels, and you can do this and you can do that. And most of the times, these fingers are actually pointed at developing countries, and it doesn't work. You can't simply point a finger like, don't do this, because the issue is Western countries allowed themselves to develop that way. Let's talk about colonization, right? Let's talk about how capitalism grew, and then it was spread all over the world because, you know, the white men decided to colonize places and kill millions of people. And then in the process, they used indigenous land. They used land for cash crops. Cash crops, basically the idea of like, you know, growing crops specifically for the idea of profit, right? It's not about your livestock in your community, it's the idea of profit maximization, which is the inherent idea of capitalism. So now countries don't get to develop the way Western countries do, and they keep being punished for it, right? So like if I don't know, Germany, where I'm from, Germany keeps polluting or was able to industrialize, like really utilize the industrialization, and now with this yappy dappy we have so much money country, and then point fingers at, I don't know, Burkina Faso and saying you can't do that because now the environment is in danger, right? And I think we can talk about the idea of like, okay, but this happened now and now we have to take all these measures. Still, the highest polluters, you can find these Western countries. These Western firms are continuously these highest polluters, right? It is not the developing countries. It is not the fact that in specific countries are not using tote bags yet. Like, that is just not the point. Particularly because all these practices of not treating the planet well, I don't want to say are just, but are very much perpetuated through the idea of capitalism and individualism, which again stems all from colonialism. You can really trace these routes back. Almost every issue, I believe, that is political, you can try like follow back to colonialism in a big sense of capitalism. And like, you know, you can argue that I'm wrong, but that's just how I feel about many issues I think about. So basically, we talk about indigenous knowledge and what it means and what kind of the imposition of your norms mean. And what I'm not saying is that science is completely colonial. I think some people, you know, my class were making an argument. I don't think so, right? Like, I think you can do science in a way that helps many communities. It doesn't have a colonial aspect to it. But I also think you have to include indigenous communities in these conversations, particularly when it comes to their land. I think oftentimes there's this notion of like, we will talk about their space and their land and their pollution, and this othering and not including those people in the conversation is a continuous issue we face about so many things. It is ridiculous, actually. Like, even the idea of conservation in certain parts of the world, right? Like oftentimes it is indigenous communities being pushed out of these areas because now we have to conserve these areas for environmental purposes. What about the indigenous communities? What about the people, right? Because it's us and them and this whole notion of it, we're not thinking about them. And that is so unfortunate and keeps happening and happening in our world. And I'm not just talking about, right, like, I don't know, Native Americans, I'm talking about many indigenous communities from specific lands. I'm thinking of Chicago, for instance, right? I was at this human rights conference in Chicago when, like, last year and the year before. And the first year, the topic was the space between us, land migration and human rights, I think it was. It was in Northwestern. It was super, super cool. But one thing we talked about was redlining in Chicago, right? And how these kind of racist norms put a lot of communities of color into certain areas in Chicago, right? That one deems as dangerous. Oh, I can't go through South Chicago because it's dangerous, which not going to dispute, but I think again, there's a lot of fundamental issues that make communities inherently more prone to crime, right? Like, you don't want to invest in the communities. Your policing just keeps killing communities. People don't get a chance to utilize these profit mechanisms we have. And then of course people have to turn to violence. Like, what are we talking about? Not a point. I almost lost my train of thought. Yes, so a lot of these communities, if you look at maps of pollution and air quality, a lot of the communities you look at in Chicago that have the highest level of air pollution are communities of color. And there's many reasons for that, and one of them is racism, like generally speaking racism. And a lot of these companies, a lot of these people dump their shit onto these communities and are like, oh girl, bye. Like, they're like, you can fend for yourself. And then the blame will be shifted to these communities. Why aren't you more sustainable? Why aren't you this? Why aren't you that? The infrastructure to even go that path is just not there. You can't blame these communities, right? And even if you want to blame them, work with them. What is the step? How can we, like, many people won't say we have to start with environmentalism. Many people start with proper school systems, let's look at food security, and like then we look into environmentalism. But I do think it's all really connected, right? I do think it's really connected in itself. Anyways, we watched this really interesting documentary actually. I think it was called There's Something in the Water by, it was celebrity who like moderated, like Elliot Page or something, I'm pretty sure. And it was really interesting because it talked about environmental racism particularly, and how water pollution again affects the most marginalized communities. And I recommend watching it. It was really interesting, particularly what stuck with me was the first part. They were in Nova Scotia in Canada, and they showed a map. They showed a map of all these sort of waste dumps that they have across the region, and all the communities that are mostly populated by Black communities, indigenous communities. And when you look at it, it's all just kind of this correlation path, right? There's like a dump here, indigenous communities here, the white communities here, and you see nothing. It's kind of just like roundabout. And I think it's the idea of people of color get pushed into these areas after a train of, you know, colonialism and slavery and racism. They get pushed in these like peripheral spaces, and then people are like, oh, let's drop our plastic trash, let's dump our toxins to these communities because we here don't need that. We can produce it, but then we'll push it there. And it was so interesting because the one community, they were really suffering from the toxins of one of the dumps got in the water that they use. So their cooking water, their cleaning water, the water they cook with, they feed the children with, was contaminated by these waste dumps they didn't produce. They didn't consent to being there. And now most people in the community have cancer. Most people in the community have cancer. And you cannot tell me that in a community of whatever many people, I don't know, 80%, 70% get cancer, you're gonna tell me there's no correlation to the toxic water? It's just no way. And the activist was talking about that journey, was talking a lot about how she was trying to talk to government authorities and these people we vote for, right? Like we vote for like how many promise, like, oh my god, we're gonna fix all your issues and we want to be on your side, and you vote for them and they do anything. They talked about how many people were like, nobody wants to talk about this issue. They talked about how they could like create water pipes to city filtered water and he still didn't want to do that because it would have cost $10,000, but he spent like what, 30-40K on Founders Day or whatever that is, right? Even the idea of Founders Day is so inherently fucked up, right? Because these communities we're not just like, oh, we're gonna build this. This was something before people came and decided to build their own communities, right? Like, these things, again, inherently colonial in itself, and it's really frustrating to see. Yeah, it's so frustrating to see. And what I took away as a person necessarily was that, how can I not contribute to this issue? And this is, right, I think where most people and myself get stuck at all the time. How do I not, like, right, I'm part of the system. This, right, you're part of the system, you're part of the schooling, you're part of every aspect of it. Most of the times we don't have the privilege also to be like, oh, I'm gonna live from like air and love, and like you're just gonna like move around. No, like, you do have to contribute to the system in many ways, and it is really hard to talk about change when you believe that change is inherently dictated by the system. But I do think conversations like these are important. I do think, and I'm not saying that people who advocate for environmentalism, who advocate for, you know, the reduction of plastic, are being wasteful. Like, I think the issue is that we need to talk about these ground ideas, like, why are these communities, right, affected more by it than others, right? Why is this like continuously happening? Why do countries dump their trash into specifically other countries, right? And like, by the way, there's also like this entirety of capitalism happening again, right? You have this thing of, oh, I don't know, example, a rich country is like, I don't want to have the waste we produce here, so you're going to ship it to another country, they're going to pay the government for it, and then the government is going to dump it somewhere in like a more outer skirt community, and then the community has all these plastic bottles, all these toxins partially as well that come with that disposal, and then shoulder shrug, what are we gonna do? Right? Like, it is all really interconnected with the rich and the capitalists who don't want to address why we're dumping that shit to these marginalized communities who are oftentimes not contributing to anything. It is really, really ridiculous, and I want to really, really read more into this because it's a niche I haven't looked into enough, in my opinion. I think you can continuously get more educated, and I really, really, really want to do that. So that, I don't know, I just really had to talk about the class, and I thought it was super interesting. And I thought it was a great start to this channel because it's one of those topics where I was like, okay, I won't give you all the facts, I won't give you all the numbers, but I just want to talk about what's in my mind and see if somebody finds interest in that topic, knows more about this topic, and wants to share it. I'd really love for this to be a community where, I don't know, people get to share their insights and personal stories as well. Like, how do you guys feel about, you know, environmentalism? How do you guys feel about, you know, Fridays for Future movement now versus then? How do you feel about the whole idea of, you know, green until emissions free by? Like, is this possible? Is this achievable? Can we achieve it by continuously neglecting these communities? Are we neglecting these communities? I don't know. I think we can all talk about it. I hope I get to know more about these things. And I'm really, really grateful that I get to take so many cool classes about it. And I get to read about it. I get to speak about it right now, which is really crazy. Yeah. And it's just one of these, I don't know. I feel really humble right now to be able also to say these things. And just give out my opinion without, you know, feeling that kind of political pressure on me. And I hope to like not just talk about colonialism, even though I do think colonialism is almost in like every political topic inherently, but I hope to talk about anything that really comes to mind and matters. Contemporary things, you will definitely find me talk about contemporary issues, political issues, and, you know, state my opinion and just kind of thought process of things that I think that are neglected in that. But I also hope to talk about more inherent things. I hope to talk about my life in general a little bit. I mean, I moved to the US 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, something like that, and many opinions are built. Many things have to be said about life here versus life in Germany, politically, socioeconomic wise, right? Like, biggest shock was really the treatment of people who live under the poverty line here, homeless people, how, and like particularly marginalized communities, right? Like, it is, I think when you're not from here and then come here, just this really crazy thing that you're witnessing, you're just like, what is happening? So yeah, I hope to talk about many, many things like that, and also just about, you know, life as a 20-something-year-old and how I try to navigate being a hopefully aware person and hopefully contribute to something good. yeah, and I'd love for people to be part of the journey a little bit. If anybody has things to share, I'd also love to have some friends on here who are so insightful and amazing and have so many great opinions, and just to talk about these things. Yeah, I think that's it for me for my very first video. I hope you liked it. I don't even know what platforms I'm going to put this all out in, but yeah, I hope to see you next one with another interesting topic.